What, time number 4, 5, 16? You're on here, James.
I don't know, four maybe. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think last time was the Triple Crown. So
Yeah, last time. Oh yeah, that was right. Last time was the Triple Crown. So now we've got the four directions of James Gray today.
good. And we have a great book for it.
Yes, I'm exceptionally excited for this one because this is a book written in the or printed in the 1600s, published in the 1600s. Uh,
Right.
and I'll let
Mhm.
you take the stage for this.
Well, so here it is there. Okay. And the title reads Philosophical Treatise on the Original and Production of Things, writ in America in a Time of Solitude by R. Frank. London, printed by John Gaines and sold by blah, 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 blah. 1687. Well, according to like all of the stationers companies records and things like this is the only book printed by any of those people involved, which sort of makes it a bit of a mystery.
So we're looking at a one of a kind book then?
um well, I mean, there's other copies of this book out there, but they're all, I think, a fake imprint. And the fact that it has a fake imprint sort of makes you suspicious, but at the same time, the author is pretty suspicious as a person too. He Not a lot is known about him, but that's sort of typical for people at the time, um, unless you're, incredibly famous or a royalty. But he did fight with Cromwell. They know that, and they could identify him at battles. And then after fighting with Cromwell, like a lot of people did, they came to America. Um, it's an interesting thing that the North Shore of the Mass Colony was inhabited by slaves from Ireland and Scotland, white slaves who are cap war POWs, and they ran things like the Saugus Ironworks. Almost everybody there was a slave making nails and then sending the nails back to England because they had bog ore there. So so it just seemed like a natural move for, ex-soldiers and trying to get new lives and things like that. In the
Now, quickly,
Yeah.
before we get on to the next part, do you want to just give a little context to some people watching us who might not know
Oh, sure.
the ordeal with Cromwell? You could just give an elevator pitch on it.
Sure. So in 1649, Parliament, well, before 1649, so 1643, Parliament's having big problems with um, King Charles. And what happens is Parliament makes their own army, and they make Cromwell the head of it. And they attack the royalist troops, and Parliament more or less takes control of the country. And then by 1649, they trap and catch King Charles I and behead him. And then Cromwell becomes Lord Protector. They don't have a king at the time, so it becomes a parliamentary country until Charles II comes along. But that's that's a spot of it. So um, basically, Frank was a soldier in the army, um, representing the parliament and keeping the royalists down. So uh, you know, it was as much like a civil war as anything, or a revolution as anything that they could have. And a lot of people's families were torn apart by it, and a lot of people just after the war just said, I would rather not be in England. So you got combination between royalists, um, the South Shore of Long Island Sound is inhabited by the people who were responsible for the beheading of Charles the First, which is interesting. The regicides, they called them, and they all just seem to end up there. So New England, you know, is much, much more complicated, especially the first few generations of inhabitants than when I think anyone's like really taking the time to write about, which would be a great subject for a doctoral dissertation. How politics sort of dissolves in England. Everybody comes here, and you've got royalists here, you've got regicides here, you've got soldiers here, you've got prisoners here, and then the natives. And one of the things that the author says is in his introduction is that he's willing to take a lottery card in life on America and comes to America. Now, there's good evidence that he wrote this in the 1680s. It was published in 1687, and then went back to England, maybe before this was published, and maybe it was published in England, or maybe it was published here, and he was going to bring them back to England and sell them, or
Okay.
something like that.
All right. Where do you think your speculation could be on where this was printed?
Um, from the looks of it, England. The quality of the type, the quality of the paper. Um, it looks like a book that's been in America for a long time, but it also looks like it was printed in England. But every once in a while, there's a page that I look at and it's like, oh, that's pretty ugly, like American printing. Um, but it's still, I think the types are too nice, and the paper looks like American paper. So it's very complicated. So I'm going to put this up and maybe you can see this. So see the type here, how it's like unevenly inked, like all the letters seem to be like off on one side. If you look at the next page here, there, you can see how the type is nice, evenly inked. So this is the way this uninked sort of blotchy stuff is the way that most American books would look. But throughout the book, it looks pretty much like every other English book of the time. Pretty straight margins, no drop type, nothing. So whoever printed it was a master. But in the 1930s, um, one of the most illustrious American book dealers ever, um, Charles Goodspeed, wrote a paper about this book suggesting how it could possibly have been published in America.
Hmm. Okay.
And
Uh,
that gives it some sort of credibility.
okay. Now, you're saying that there's some bits of it, like it's quality, it seems like a very quality made book. So what would have this kind of been the target audience or the type of client to have owned this sort of book?
I would suspect it was written for people in England to know what America was like. So, um, but that being said, I think it was a hobby horse for him. He wasn't, like, I'm going to write this book. I think he had like um, one of those minds that um, were also prevalent in the 17th century that um, I have lots of ideas. I'm going to sit down and write a book about it. Was a typical thing to do. It's like doing a podcast or a blog or whatever. That if you have ideas, like put them out there, and that's just an easy way to do it. In 1640, the guilds sort of lost control of the printing press, and certainly by the 1660s, if you had the money, you could just print a book, you know, and there was licensing and stuff involved, but most books weren't licensed by this time. And this is just a great example of the quirky little books that, uh, were printed at the time. Uh, once once uh, publishing became so prevalent, then the quality drops down in the cheaper books, and just overrun the market, and then you get more authorized books, copyrights, things like that. But this book is, certainly from the dead center of the time, 1687, when if you wanted to write a weird book, you could write a weird book, and
Okay.
not too complicated.
Well, yeah, and I remember our last interview that definitely got weird. Like, what kind of information does this in the modern day provide uh, on in the colonies at that period?
I think he wants to be much more informative than he is. He has he has like a threefold uh, uh, outline where he talks about he wants to talk about the relationship between the wisdom of divine knowledge and the secrets of nature, and at the same time um, how hermetic philosophy dovetails with those two ideas. So that's a big thing, and he refers to Job as having a great big library, which is sort of interesting. For the most, he refers to Job as the most accurate mathematician, um, because he never measures, and his library was made of the firmament and every star. So, so you get like the natural philosopher who doesn't have an intermediary of, you know, Aristotle or anything. He's just like a man of the earth. And I think that to a certain degree, Frank wants us to see the Native Americans in that way as well. But he always balances it with Moses's point of view. So it has a Mosaic index and a natural index. So he talks about fishing and the fish that are in America and wonderful things like that, and how fishing is so in one with nature and godly. And, that Christ was a fisher of men. And so he just keeps expanding what he sees by way of um, metaphor and hyperbole into a Mosaic understanding of nature. Oof,
So,
that
so
was
this
pretty
is being
big.
described as like God's country.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So this is God's country.
Hmm.
And so
Sure.
this is, yes, this is also, if I'm taking this information correctly, he's also stating that there right now is a good relationship between the colonists from Europe and the tribes.
Um, he doesn't um he doesn't get into it politically that
Mhm.
much. It's more like he just seems to be grabbing philosophical metaphors from them.
Okay.
But at the same time, what was common in this period was most people referred to them as savages, and that um, and he does that too. He talks about how how basic the natives were, and that it was a vast desert, and for that, when he says desert, he meant forest. And there was no arable language land, no agriculture or anything like that, and that if it wasn't for the colonists to come and clear all the trees out, it would turn back into this bleak desert where only savages could live.
Oh,
So so it's not like he's totally what we would consider um, holistically appreciating nature as it was, and uh,
Yeah.
understanding the natives as part of nature, but um, almost I think he almost thinks of them as slovenly, but the way you would think of an animal as slovenly for not like cutting down a tree, I guess. I don't know.
Okay. That's a interesting perspective. The only thing, for some reason, what came to mind was the Christopher Columbus writings, where he's like talking about the tribe he's interacting with, as he's like they let each other speak. Uh,
Mhm.
they've got this democratic system. They're God's people. They would make perfect slaves.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of like this weird, like, okay, you're saying something good about them,
Mhm.
but then it kind of hops back to these uh,
Right.
primitive creatures.
Well, and I think that what what is the connection between the primitive idea is that they have a different religion.
Okay.
So
So
that
spiritual elitism.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Wow, that's interesting to wrap your head around. The religion makes it changes the entire playing field as how one would look at another. Okay, so um,
Oh, one of the weirdnesses of the book is that um it's it's um pseudo author is the Rabbi Moses. So he sort of like is stepping into like the Moses of the New World.
I
Yeah,
am the neon Moses. Okay.
yeah,
All right, that is
yeah,
one man's claim to being the neon Moses.
yeah,
I haven't heard that one before, but I feel like that should be like a song title or on a t-shirt.
yeah, yeah. It should. Um,
All right.
so here's a great quote. I just so he sees it as the New Jerusalem. You know, now
Okay.
now in opposition to the light stands in the formidable darkness a figure, a creature that would found fold up after divine act and force of separation, not improper thereof, unto a little darkness, since the separation from the beauteous beam of light, and such a, is sin, and such also is death, since by Adam's transgression, whose consenting to sin violates God's divine and regal command, so woundeth himself in his own staying, death and sin, therefore, Van Helmont, the wonderful hermeticist scientist, um, death and sin, therefore, calls accidents and some impetus malignity that lurks about all matter, whereby to lessen the light and abscond or eclipse the beautiful luster, which, when moved by divine grace to God, seems to appear celestial. It's like, whoa. So we're going back to uh, this battle of, good and evil, light and darkness, and how um, America, when they came here, was so dark because they didn't cut down all the trees and farm and things like that and have the light of God. So only only when the British colonists come can it become a new Jerusalem. So he's got some very, very complicated takes on this.
Okay. Were these like common beliefs at the time?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That doesn't take me entirely too much as a surprise, but didn't think I would look at someone using as a Bible term to try and scientifically explain.
Um,
why it's
Yeah,
okay to cut the trees
it-
down.
yeah. Well, so just like geocentrism,
Yeah.
um, that the English mind was the center of the earth, and the English theology was the center of the earth, and that they needed to bring that here in order to make what God wanted it to be. You
Okay.
know, they
So
wanted
they're on
new,
a mission from God, is what
sure.
he's trying to say.
Well, they definitely, yeah,
Okay. Okay. All right. This is all right. This is a quality historical learning moment.
well, you know, the sun is the great luminary whose lustrous body illustrates the creation. Let there be light. And that the way they see bringing light to the world is by enlightenment, by bringing their brand of Christianity here and imposing it on the world and the new world, the new Jerusalem.
Holy shit. Okay.
Yeah, it's very, very so the sun is the sovereign. The sun is God.
All right. This is direct words you're reading from out of this book.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay. That's wow. All right.
yeah,
That's one way to put it.
yeah, yeah. And yeah, so in the middle of this like complicated thing, um, I was when I was reading it, I was like looking, just like waiting. Can I find like the Aurora Borealis mentioned or the Northern Lights? And he doesn't seem to mention those,
Mhm.
but he does talk about there being two great lights, and one of them is the moon, which is like a complicated uh, explanation that he didn't know much about astronomy at the time, because pretty much everybody figured out it was just reflections. But so and then he talks about the parts of the moon and the celestial changes and um and then he he compares the sun to like a culinary fire. So I mean everything from like the how you're going to cook your food to how you're going to plant your crops is all sort of attached into this notion of light.
Okay. Um, wow.
Yeah,
Interesting thinking.
yeah,
So aside from the sun and the moon and celestial movements and saying everything, trying to justify everything that the colonists do by saying that he's apparently the new Moses and this is the new Jerusalem and we're on a mission from God. Um, what other things does he get into? Does he get into everyday life kind of things that people might be doing?
it's more about nature.
Hmm.
It's almost all about nature. Sometimes he will talk about um, interaction with nature. Like I said, fishing is like one of the few places where he talks about it. Um, and when he does talk about the world, he talks about worldly what's he call them? Allurements. That's it. Allurements he refers to them as. And yes, charms of luxury, avarice, the usual things. And I imagine that his America at the time was pretty sparse,
Hmm.
and still like while people had pretty nice houses in 1680s, they were still being heated by the fire, and it was still cold in the winter and hot in the summer, and very, very. I think that the common day-to-day survival was fortified by lots of beer, and when you say like avarice, it it means probably eating and drinking and taking physical comforts without following the rules of the Bible, I guess, or whatever those might be, according to him. So, um, as you can see, he begins with these huge um, um, observations, and then metaphorically um, translates them into a Christian Mosaic philosophy, which
Okay.
is which is sort of why this book is so fitting to be like the first philosophical book written in America at this point. I think that there is this like constant like battle between uh, nature and man's responsibility or place in nature, uh, that that is so American, and you see so rarely in other books um, taken as implicity, um, as an implicit facts. In other countries, they modulated the difference between science and theology and learning so much, um, in so much more structured way than here in the colonies where everything is new and savage. He's just like grabbing it, like, how can we like make these things fit together? And he deals with like really big problems. um let's see. So he says that the world had a beginning. This is undeniable. That time sprung from eternity. This is also indisputable. That generation succeeded time. This is beyond any dispute and a totally unquestionable. And that generation terminates in death, which is also infallible. And that the elements and principles were lodged in the great mass of chaos is true. The fire, because of its dignity, succeedeth the rest. This is most true. So, and the air, because of its purity, climbed up after fire. It is certainly true, leaving water rolling to and fro, fluctuating, incirculating, inspiring the earth, and that the earth, as essential to the rest by wisdom and providence, was consecrated on this basis. Um, so you can see he's definitely like dealing with the beginnings of like mankind, and it is philosophy in a sense, but it's also like Nostradamus. I mean, it's like, wow, very, very what's the word?
Morbid also.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that he just puts out his ideas and enforces them, and doesn't give you any room for like thought here. You're just like, it's unquestionable, this is like undeniable, this is true, blah blah blah.
Everything is all a matter of fact.
Yes. Yeah. And then he talks about, so he goes from there, and then the next thing is like, oh, so um he says that there's fiction notions of heathens and infidels and atheistical anti-scripturalists who suggestions are of an imaginary being a superlative being whose real existence is existent in himself, pre-exceeding time, and the God of nature. God bless them forever. So there he's saying that you if you're a heathen or an infidel and you think that the nature of God is in you and not outside of you, then God bless you, because that's not true. And that, the earth brought forth grass, and that's the natural production, and that all flesh is grass, meaning it, it's to be burnt down. It's to be like, disparaged in a state of corruption. And then he flips over and says, but the herb yielded seeds, and the fruit trees the seeds, and the roots the fruits also after their kind, um, which, which are impregnated in every individual, nor are they found in another species. Um, and then he quotes another mystical natural historian, Sandigovius, tells us that before the separation of the elements, that every individual had in them itself a virtuality, or one signal primordial seed. So again, unity and before separation, which is sort of interesting.
So then this kind of turns into this whole idea that everyone's still connected to God, or
Right.
it's
Yeah. It all is of God's stuff.
Mhm.
It's a like so, the Zen have like this doctrine of Jiji Muji, in which um, they describe as like the in a interpenetration of things into all things, where one is all and all is one, sort of holism. So he fools around with that for a while, and then he talks about um, the species of plants, and then all of a sudden the species of animals, and the relationship between. I think the one of the wonderful images I got of this was he was comparing falcons to shark. Falcons in the air are like shark in the water, that they always are flying and going forward, and it's that kind of stuff.
Ah,
So yeah.
never heard someone compare a falcon to a shark.
Yeah.
Fascinating thoughts right there.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, really an amazing book. And I haven't, I've tried to find anybody who's written, a sustained description of this book, or an analysis of it, and I haven't found any. All I can find is people, who have like discussed the printing history of it, or discussed the the factuality of whether it was written in America or not, but not the text itself. The text itself seems to be like a little daunting to most people. And again, that seems perfectly fitting with the situations of the American colonies at that time. That a lot of people were just throwing ideas out there and then trying to like modify them into the sense that the pre-existing conditions, I guess you should call it.
Yeah, yeah, that is. It's an interesting. Yeah, it's interesting. It's also kind of a complicated concept to wrap your head around. Uh,
Hmm.
too, to try and put yourself back in his shoes and understand where he was trying to get at and why he was trying to get at and why he was selectively choosing what he was choosing to produce his argument.
Right. And so the books we talked about last week all had sort of like a logical trajectory. The pseudodoxia epidemica was trying to correct wrong things. And the Restitution of Decayed Intelligence was trying to bring back old histories that were forgotten, and so on and so forth. This book seems to be like trying to have like a almost Americanist view of nature, but trying to keep it leashed in by Mosaical Christian philosophy,
Yeah.
which there's never an easy uh, correlation between the two.
Yeah. And this just came to mind. Would his religious philosophy, um, would that be a political stance? Would it indicate he's trying to enforce zealotry?
Um, I think it is a political stance as an outsider. I don't think he was like he was he was definitely um, an educated Puritan for sure, but at the same time, he mentions texts which are I think a little obscure for most people that weren't highly educated. Um, Sendigovius, Van Helmont, you know, who were considered um, I guess alchemists most likely, and um, there was a really um, hard thing going on in the colonies in Cambridge with alchemy too. There was um, American alchemists. George Starkey was one of them, um, and um, Harvard College built him a uh, an alchemical furnace. you know, so I mean, so the world was like really sort of a loosey goosey, undetermined place at that time.
Okay. Yeah. Now, also, what was the alchemic? This I'm trying to avoid keeping this from turning into a can of worms that from opening Pandora's box on wormholes that or not wormholes, downward spirals this conversation could go
Mhm.
into. Um, but there's a number of motives and goals throughout the various forms of alchemists that
Right.
came and went over the ages.
Mhm.
Um, Now, when we're opening this box on the concern of alchemists at the time, is this the alchemists like John Dee trying to find the essence of life, the God particle, or
Right.
are we looking at alchemists in term of highly experimental scientists of the 1600s that were trying to find different ways to create dehydrated food or mess around with different metals.
Oh, he was definitely a spiritual alchemist or hermeticist, um, trying to interpret the spirit of things within themselves. I mean, like, um, Cardanus had this notion of signatures of things, which he sort of borrowed from Lucretius, and seeds of things that, you know, everything's like sort of sticks together, but at the same time, um, you know, it's written by Rabbi Moses, so he's got to like sort that out too.
Yeah.
Where so the experimentalist type alchemist like American George Starkey um, wasn't really even concerned with those problems. I think he just like wanted to like experiment, and whatever came. Whereas Frank is definitely trying to keep everything. based in the Bible,
Okay.
but he has his own ideas and they conflict with it. And that's what this book really is. He keeps struggling with why he believes so much in Job and Paul and their struggles, but on the same time, eh, he keeps coming up with these great like little phrases like the lioness, the lion and the lioness roared, and then this in the desert, and the ass with the mule bray in common, but the hart and the hind bellow in the forest, and the leopard would pan. Wow. And there, besides the wolf and the tiger, we hear the howl of the barren wilderness. And it's like, wow.
Yeah.
It definitely, he's just being like um, bibliopoetica, and still trying to position himself like, where are we out here? Because it's so different than coming from a place that has such a structured, even though um, volatile social system as England, to just the wilderness where a lot of people were just doing their own thing. And you know sending money back to the uh, mother country, or goods or services, but there's also a lot of separatists here, a lot of gray badgers.
Yeah. A lot of gray badgers. Okay, that is definitely a way to start your morning.
Yeah,
Talking about this complicated subject.
yeah, I think yeah, I could go on for more, but I think that sort of covered this book, and you can just read my blog about it. And it is available online, sort of. You can read the whole text online, and but it is a genuinely rare book, um, and more people should know about it.
Yeah. So I'm gonna leave the link in the description, and
Good.
I definitely recommend people need to go check this out. This is a very interesting piece of little known American literature, regardless whether or not if you agree with the author who claims to be the Moses 2.0. Um, but thank you for sharing this, James.
Oh,
And
welcome.
I do wish you all the luck and success in selling this to the right client.
Thank you.